Digital transformation is everywhere. Companies large and small are finding new ways to digitize and automate their business processes. But a lot of times, projects to make that happen get stuck along the way. Learn how to get them unstuck on this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
We're going to talk with an expert today about how to get your digital transformation unstuck. Yes, it happens all the time, folks. Projects get stuck for various reasons. Sometimes it's technology. A lot of times it's not, quite frankly. But we'll talk about what that means. And our friend Cory Smith dialing in from down in Hotlanta with a company called FPT Software. And Cory has an amazing history. My goodness, this guy has built banking systems, some of the earliest websites. Now he does digital transformation. And Cory, you've got a really cool 6-step process here for getting digital transformation unstuck. But first of all, tell us a bit about yourself and your history and how you got here today.
Well, thank you for having me today. And you're too kind calling me an expert. I've been in digital business or the internet business, depending on how you want to look at it, for about 30 years. Started about 30 years ago, kind of fell into the business coming out of college. I built websites. I worked as a designer, a desktop publisher, if you remember those days. And the small ad agency I was working for in Tallahassee, Florida, asked me, hey, can you build a website for this car dealership? And I was like, yeah, I think I can figure that out. And I built one, and then I built another one, and to build another one. And the girl I worked with ended up working. Her uncle owned an internet service provider in Miami, and she left college and went down and told her uncle, she's like, you should hire this guy. He can build websites. And they hired me, and I moved to Miami and became the creative director for this internet service provider. Joined an organization down there called the Association of Internet Professionals. Met a gentleman there who was his name was Rich Gordon, just to give him a shout out to somebody who gave me my career. And he was the information technology person for the Miami Herald. And they were looking for somebody to help them put the newspapers online. And I met him at this club, and him and another gentleman named Mike Simmons. And they were like, hey, would you like to come build newspapers, put newspapers online? And wow. I said, yeah, that sounds cool. And away we went. And here we are 30 years later. I've done everything, put newspapers online, almost all of them for Knight Ridder, Miami Herald, San Jose Mercury News, Philadelphia, Cars.com, Career Builder, internet banking systems for Equifax and SunTrust. And wow. I've worked for the American Le Mans series, built websites and in-car cameras and all kind of timing and scoring systems, and worked at ad agencies and built crazy web and mobile applications and social media applications for them. And you name it, boy, I've done it over the years. And then I most recently have worked in consulting, which is what I do now, helping people with innovation and digital transformation. And prior to this, I worked at Aflac for the last 4 years in their innovation lab called Hatch, helping them to redefine the future of insurance.
Wow. That's
so pretty cool stuff.
You could pick up any number of threads here, but the fact that you have newspaper business, I think it's kind of fascinating, and we can kind of couch all this in the context of digital transformation. And let's face it, man, the print media business, that's my background, actually. My first job I did was at a newspaper, a small town newspaper. I was the reporter, and then one day I became the de facto editor because my boss had a stroke. And so I took over running the whole paper for like a year and a half. And we actually did an environmental magazine ourselves on the side, and stumbled into an interview with a guy named Jacques Cousteau. So wow. That was fun. Yeah, I actually got Jacques Cousteau to say to me, yes, you're absolutely right. So I was like, yes, that is a life success story right there. But that was back in the old days. We used print production. I mean, we had a stat camera that we shot our negatives on. Oh, yeah, we did.
I did paste up. I did newspaper.
That's so funny. And now, I mean, look at the transformation to online media today. I mean, I would say that they're still having a difficult time making the transition. I mean, we have different forces now, like Facebook coming in and YouTube, and the sort of fragmentation of the old media and then a recoalescing of new media. And so you were there. I mean, you saw the early days as we were trying to sort of retrofit this old model into this new amazing paradigm. And it's the number of challenges are significant, and you really have to think through what you're doing, right?
Well, when we started at the Miami Herald, they actually took reporters from the newsroom and put them in the room with us, with the developers that were building the newspaper. And they treated it just like they were building the newspaper. So it was still like people going out and beating the street and getting the stories and checking sources. And it was very old school. And they didn't run things unless they verified it and double verified and triple verified it. And the dichotomy of that against the way that we kind of do, or the way that you see news evolve. This is again back in the early 90s,
right?
Before the kind of onset of kind of like tabloid media, right? Because the Miami Herald considered itself kind of like a bastion of, like, stood itself up against the New York Times and the Washington Post as like a Pulitzer Prize winning newspaper, where we only print news that's fit to print, and we don't, post or print. I shouldn't say post. I'm talking like we live in today's world. Print stories that we don't confirm, that we don't are sure that are media. Whereas today, you hear people, you even see on the news media is like sources. We're hearing from sources, or we're,
right.
That's unconfirmed news, right? And now it's just anything kind of goes. It's where, anything that anybody can go out with a phone and a video camera and post something, and it's reposted, or it's opinion, or there's kind of a blurred line between what's news and what's opinion, and what's rhetoric, or what's innuendo. It's an odd time. It's an odd time.
Well, it's fascinating to me that you have this background, because here we're talking about digital transformation and companies, brick and mortar companies, everything from restaurants to insurance companies. I mean, basically everyone out there these days needs to have a digital presence. And digital transformation literally means taking the analog and transforming it to go onto the web. Although there are still vestiges of the analog world everywhere. We're on a radio station right now, right?
Right.
So
And back to the news business, it was like when we started in the news business, it's understanding, like, everyone is like, okay, at the beginning in Web 1.0, it was like, okay, now we got this really gee whiz kind of idea of the internet, and we're going to put everything on the internet. And that was kind of the information age, or the information economy, where it was just like, let's get things out. Right. And then it was like, okay, now how do we monetize this? And for the newspaper business, right, when things were new, the only thing you could think about was, okay, well, how do we monetize the newspaper? Well, with classified ads, right? That was the way that made sense. So it's like, how do we digitize classified ads? And that's how I ended up working on like cars.com and Career Builder, which at the time had a different name. But that was like the logical thing, is like, we need to move the thing that makes us money from the print world to the digital world, right?
Right.
And so you still see that kind of trend even happening today, 30 years later, where businesses that are brick and mortar businesses that are trying to evolve or kind of move to the digital age still think in terms of brick and mortar, and that is kind of what stymies their, for lack of a better term, digital transformation, or their transformation is probably a better way to do it, or a better way to say it, is that they still think in terms of like, oh, this is the way that we make money offline. How do we now translate that into the digital world? And they think of it as a one-to-one transition, and it's not, right? You have to think of it new paradigm. And now as we move into, and not even to further muddy the waters, as we move into the Web 3 or the metaverse, now we're looking at that evolution again, and how do we change people, the model that we make monetize things, our business models, from Web 2 platform economy to Web 3 is going to be even more complicated right now, because we not only have a new way that we're going to interact with each other and with businesses, but we're also going to be introducing potentially a new way that we're going to pay for things, new currencies.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, you think about the transformation that's taken place, and you're right. It was a 1.0 and then a 2.0, and now
Right.
we're at the sort of precipice of 3.0, and so many things change. It's very difficult. I look at all the media sites today, and it's amazing. Pop-ups are back with a vengeance. I mean, you cannot get to any site without getting slammed with one or two pop-ups.
Yeah.
And it's like, I remember that first time that came, and there was this big pushback, and it all went away. And now here it comes roaring back because they're all still trying to figure it out, right?
Yes. Well, and it's so funny that we've reached the 21st century and we still, and we've come so far in the technology. I always say to even my kids, is like, you hold more power in the palm of your hand with your iPhone than we had to take us to the moon. Yet we still haven't figured out how to do personalization right. If you're thinking, like, speaking of pop-ups, is that I think that you would probably find little friction from most people, that they would love to have the ability to go from one website to another or one shopping experience to another and have their preferences follow them. But they would prefer to not have their personal information weaponized, right? For advertising or for other things, right? So why? I mean, you know that the technology exists today for us to be able to do that, but why haven't we been able to figure that out, how to do that for people, how to deliver that? Right? It's so odd. But there's a lot of forces behind that. Like, I don't want to make it sound nefarious. There's, like, I've worked for many years in the advertising and marketing business. And, like we used to say in marketing, is you have to be creepy, just not too creepy, right? And being the vice president of digital for many advertising agencies, that was the mantra, right? It's like, we need to collect enough data about people so that we can target advertising, so that we can show return on investment for our advertisers, for our marketers. But we don't want to be too creepy to be invasive. But there's a line, and we often cross that line. In marketing, we are able to collect data down to what your address is. And once we know your address and your phone number, we can find your income. We can find who lives next to you, like what your level of college, your education is, and all of these things that allows us to build a profile of how to specifically and very in a detailed way, what type of products we can and what type of things we can market to you, and how successful they will be in marketing those things to you. It allows us to be more targeted, and of course, you as a consumer on our list is a higher value, which we can charge more and makes us more money. It's, like I said, it's creepy, but not too creepy, but it is creepy.
Talking to someone who's been doing that for 30 years or more, taking us into the future of the interwebs and how much things are changing. And we're talking to Cory Smith of FPT Software. He built websites for media companies like newspapers. He built websites for banks. And so it's kind of fun, Cory, because you span the spectrum of, like, media, which is tons of information and very complex hierarchies and taxonomies and things like that. And then banks, where it's got to be super secure and you have to worry about that whole side of the equation. And, frankly, I'm very impressed with what the banks have been able to do these last 25 years to move from that old way of closing the books and very manual processes to just, now you look at fintech and it's just crazy, right? But we wanted to touch on blockchain again. And blockchain actually has a lot of applications in media and in fintech, because it's around the immutability, it seems to me, and having this immutable record and audit trail where you can then, it's good in, like, the post-close space of, like, big clearing houses and other financial systems, right? Because and really what we're seeing in that space is not just streamlining processes, but collapsing processes. It used to take 5 days. Now it takes 4 hours or something. That's an amazing transformation, right?
And that's the really interesting conversations I've been having with banks recently. I've had the fortunate ability to talk to a lot of big box banks recently, and a lot of neobanks and micro banks, just in my role as a consultant. and they approach it completely differently. Talk to these big box banks. They talk about managing contracts and managing international transfers, right? And just what blockchain has brought to their ability to be able to make those kind of transfers in a fraction of the time, and being able to move money across international borders, which has traditionally had a lot of barriers and a lot of complexity to it. And now blockchain has removed those barriers, and where it would take them literally days and sometimes weeks to move money across the globe.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
And it takes them hours. And it's changed, and it's created a huge, like our economy, the global economy has changed so much in the last, I don't know, 6 or 8 years. There's so much more liquidity now, and it's brought to bear the ability for people that are looking to raise capital or move capital quickly, allowed them to do that so much faster. It's amazing, and it's opened so much markets and so many different places in the world that we're not able to receive or be able to transfer money so quickly. And then, of course, we see what that's done in consumer banking, and with the proliferation of neobanks and microbanks, right? Which is ironic, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, to our friends at the big box banks, like the Banks of America and the Wells Fargo. But they, while they do consumer banking, it's not really their focus anymore, right? They've kind of passed that on, and they don't even consider places like even Discover Bank or Chime or any of these smaller banks competition anymore. They're happy to give up consumer-based banking to these smaller companies, because now it's so easy for them to provide these services. Banking as a service is a thing now, because it's empowered and enabled by things like blockchain, and it's so easy now. It's amazing, the technology advances simply because of the Hyperledger fabric.
And what's interesting here is that you're pointing out the significance and I guess dramatic speed of change that we're seeing today. And every business person has to be very cognizant of that, because business models get upended very quickly within 2-3 years if you're not paying attention. A lot of times I'll use the example of web conferencing technology. So we use Zoom, and I remember in 2005 to do one webinar with On24, they charged you $2,000, like just for the tech.
Right.
$2,000. Now I pay $207 a month. I could do 100 webinars in a month. So I mean, the disparity in cost structures is just crazy. And I think the next horizon is going to be machine learning and artificial intelligence, where hitherto it was only the Fortune 2000 who could afford that stuff. Now anyone can afford it if you just know how to use it and where to get it. What do you think?
Yeah, well, it's almost become a commodity, right? It's like it's so available, and like we may have talked about a little bit earlier, is that these things become commoditized and they become platformized, right? So in a way, we were before, like even the early days of the internet, like everything had to be hand coded, right? Now they build these platforms where it's like low code, no code platforms, where you have citizen developers, where anybody in your office can learn at a very a low cost of training, learn how to build these things without any kind of specialized computer science degree or any kind of coding background. It's just kind of a very simplified scripting language. And like you come from a data background, things like Snowflake or Pegasystems, like these things you can go learn in weeks or months, and you can be an effective data manager, writing these kind of workflows and scripts, and you don't need any kind of special data science background. It's amazing.
How amazing is that? So you figure the cloud in and of itself enabled digital transformation. for lots of different reasons. One, you don't have to buy the servers anymore. You don't have to stand up the servers. That was a whole massive side of the equation that these old banks and all these big companies had to deal with. They all had a data center, and those data centers aren't going away anytime soon, but no doubt that the future is in the cloud. And then to your point, this next wave all around low code, no code, where anyone who can kind of think through a business process can now stitch together workflows, and boom, you're off to the races with your new business model, just like that, right?
Right. And you can scale at will, scale up, scale down. And it's cost effective and it's easily manageable. You know, it's just provided a whole new level, and it allows businesses to scale at will at any time, right? It's cost manageable. It just adds a whole new level of business flexibility to people, and it takes a lot of risk and a lot of cost out of building a business. Like anybody can build a business at this point and start small and scale quickly without making a huge investment, thanks to these cloud-based models, you know?
Yeah, and it really is fascinating. And then now you think about personalization, you think about the availability of data, and even here, the cost structures are coming down, right? I mean, you do have some significant regulation coming online, CCPA out in California, GDPR, and there are a lot of companies in America that just treat that as de facto the law, even though it's technically not, unless you're in California or the European Union, but that's the straw in the wind. So there is this weird dynamic now of again, you get back to your comment about creepiness, right? Of like, how do you balance the preferences? And I refer to it as the right to be respected, right? So GDPR, you've got the right to be forgotten, which is an ambitious goal. And I try to point this out to people, like, even if you say, okay, forget me, it's pretty hard to track down all the bits and pieces of data about you at any company, right? But to take it a step further, the right to be respected just says, look, I'm a customer of you. Pay attention to my data. Pay attention to how you use it, and at least know what you're doing and have some ethics about it. And companies that do that are going to be fine.
Just be a good steward. I don't think that's too much to ask, is to be a good steward of my personal information.
Right.
And like I said, but it's hard to. I mean, it's understanding the way that these things and the speed at the internet and all of these applications develop. You know, it's understandable that these things kind of get away from us, right? Like, just to be honest about it, is I often think about and take stock in the contributions that I've made over 30 years to things like social media. Like, I've built and been part of building pieces to social media platforms, or to the fabric of social media platforms, that I have some level of regret about now, as we see now what the negative aspects of what social media have provided to us, you know, bullying and all of the things that it has negative on our culture. But you know, as with many things, the idea of what we created at the beginning was altruistic. You know, it's going to bring people together, allow you to connect with old friends and family and stay in contact with them. It's the same thing as like with business models, like with Uber and Airbnb. Like, the idea of being able to, you know, use your car to go and make a living and pick up people and give them a ride somewhere, or go rent out your summer vacation home and to make a little extra income, is turned into hedge funds buying huge amounts of homes in places that you don't even live, and then they take these houses off the market, and it's this big thing. Like, nobody foresaw that was what was going to happen. That wasn't the idea behind the business model. It's just what happens. It's the natural, organic evolution of these things, right?
Yeah,
and like, so these things happen, like, just like what happened with marketing. Of course it was going to be exploited. That's the nature of what we do in business. But now that it's evolved, and I feel like it's reached its apex, and I feel like, you know, where we haven't quite reached our apex with data yet, but we're getting there. And I think it's time for us to start looking at, like, you know, these things, like these laws coming out, GDPR being one of them, is it's time for us to become good stewards. And I think there are companies out there, I'm just using Apple as an example, that's saying, hey, we're going to plant a flag and say it's time for us to be a good steward of our users' data and put some restrictions on it. You know,
yeah, that's a good point. And, you know, as I think about the the ongoing challenges for business people, I think the real key going forward is going to be to think about what makes you and your organization special and
Right.
focus on that. Like we saw that, I think, with COVID, where a lot of companies had to figure out new ways of making money because all the dynamics changed, right? You couldn't do in-person dining, so it became curbside pickup, for example. You had
Right.
this focus on understanding what do we do really, really well that other people don't do as well. And you focus on that and keep an open mind to how to change the infrastructure of your business. I think that's the key. That's what digital transformation is all about, is
Right.
changing out the chassis of the car once you realize that you could just rent this service for less than you were paying to stand it up yourself.
That's right.
And that's when these intersection points hit, these inflection points, and you just have to watch for that and read and research and talk to folks like yourself and just be open to changing how you do things, right?
Well, and that's what we spent the last 2.5 years at Aflac doing, was like, how do we maintain, because, Aflac's bread and butter, or their brand, what is white glove service to their policyholders. To, when we sell, like as an example, we sell a group policy to a large company, let's pick a name, Home Depot. We would go out and we would send an army of agents out to go sit in the cafeteria, and one by one we would explain to them what their policies are and what the employer was offering them, and we would sign each one of them up individually, so they would have that individual experience of understanding what was being offered and explain to them what their coverage was, and it was like a personal experience. And that's Aflac's brand, was that they, it's a personal one-on-one relationship between the agent and every individual policyholder. Well, then the pandemic happened. How are we able to deliver that same personalized experience without actually being in person, right? So that's what we spent the last 2 years in the innovation team doing, was how do we take that and deliver that same experience without being in person? Right. So we had to think of very creative ways about how we deliver that. And we were able to do that digitally by leveraging technology like Zoom, right? And creating, what we call like account landing pages. So we would send out an email to the customer, the potential new customer, and say, you can come to this website. And it had a welcome video from their agent, and it would say, here's all of your policies. You can read about them. There's a video about each one of them that explains them to you. And then you can also schedule a Zoom call with your agent, and your agent will walk you through and answer all of your questions. And then we can actually do your live signing of your paperwork. And and Adobe e-signing, you would do it live with somebody over the, WebEx. And it would be just like you would be doing it live. That was the closest that we could come to it. And it worked out really well. It was hugely popular for us. But, like that was like, that's the thing, is like, a lot of people would be just like, well, we'll just put the forms online and we'll let them fill it out. But it was like very important to Aflac and to us on the team of like delivering that experience and thinking about like, how do we maintain the core, the essence of our brand, and deliver that experience online, to make sure that we deliver the same thing that we would do in person. Like, because this is not just a tenet of the pandemic, this is the tenet of the future as we move towards, again, Web3, right? Where people are going to be moving further and further away from in-person interactions, further towards digital interactions.